right. Hello and welcome to Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. Today I'm honored to have Joe Hawley and his amazing and fascinating story that you're going to get to hear today. Two things that kind of stuck out to me about Joe as I've gotten to learn his story is one, the humbleness that he has, even though he's had so much success as an amazing professional. And then two, a phrase that he lives by. And as you hear his story, you're going to know why. And that's on the other side of fear lies freedom. And, at this phase in his life, he's taking full advantage of that phrase in that comment. So Joe, thanks so much for being on today.
Yeah, thanks, brother. I really appreciate you having me, and I'm excited to jam with you for a little bit and share my story.
Heck yeah. So I want to start with, we're in California growing up, and you're a big guy, but as a freshman, you're big for being a freshman, but we're not as big as we are today. But you're playing football and you start seeing some success. And there was a moment where you were able to drive a guy backwards 20 yards and you say, holy cow, maybe I'm pretty good at this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't the big. I think I was like 5'9", one. I don't even remember now. That was way back. But yeah, I mean, I have no idea why I went out and played football, because my brother, who played 2 years before me, absolutely hated it. He'd come home, tell my mom he wanted to quit every day. Like, I was around there, I was like, wow, this must be really, really challenging to be out there. The coach is yelling at him, like having to run a bunch, being physically active is like not his thing. I asked all my friends before freshman year, you guys want to join the football team with me? And none of them said yes. They're like, no, you're crazy, we'd get killed. So it was kind of my first moment of really stepping outside my comfort zone and really answering that whisper within myself of like, hey, you should go try this thing. And I remember when I first stepped on the field, I absolutely loved it. Had no idea what it was or like what the position groups were, like how to play the game at all. And it wasn't until about halfway through my first year when I was playing offensive line, grabbed a guy and I drove him down the field, kind of like that Blind Side clip. If you guys have seen the movie where he drives him over the fence, I drove him 20 yards downfield, just ran. And he finally just went on his back. And the feeling I had, I'm like vibrating right now thinking about it. The feeling I had was so good. I remember getting up being like, that's how you play football. And yeah. I played 16 years. And if you turn on any clip of me playing my entire career, I don't think there's one play where you wouldn't see me just giving it everything I had to put that guy on his back.
Yes. So it's interesting, right? There's so many people that feel like, well, gosh, if you don't start your kid playing a sport at 6, they're going to be behind the curve, which, there's some things to be said about learning early and, maybe having an advantage, but there's also something to be said that you didn't miss the boat if you started late, right?
Yeah, especially in football. I remember wanting to go out for Pop Warner when I was younger. I was probably in like 5th or 6th grade. And I was like 20 pounds over the limit, because at Pop Warner, there's a weight maximum, right? Because They don't want these big kids to kill these small kids. So like the linemen are the same size as the receivers. Yeah. And what I'm learning through my life journey, and now that I'm a father and I'm talking to other fathers with their kids that are a little bit older and getting them into sports, like at that age, I mean, are they really learning the proper techniques? It could be a detriment to their actual long-term success in the game, because they might lose the love for it, because when you're that young, all you want to do is like run around and have fun with your friends. And if there's a bunch of, fathers out there being like, you got to do this, like, hit them, get your hands inside. And the kid's like, what are you talking about? Like, I just want to play the game.
Right.
And so it can create this thing where it's like not as fun. You get burnt out. For me, I went to a really good high school, and the coaches were really amazing as far as like football IQ and technique. And so I was able to learn with this kind of raw blank slate. And although it might have taken me that first year or two, but that's why you kind of joined freshman football. And then,
yes,
by my junior year, I had it figured out, and I was really balling out there. And it wasn't because I was playing my entire life. It's because I think it was actually a benefit to me that I didn't start till that time, because I probably would have got burnt out and not enjoyed it as much.
Yeah, I love that. Now, thinking about that, as you progress through high school, you start getting college attention. When did that start for you? Everyone's a little bit different, in regards to, hey, when were offers coming in and when were you really starting to, hit the conversations with college coaches. But when did that start for you, Joe?
Yeah. So about, excuse me. So my sophomore year, about halfway through my sophomore year, my coach came up to me and he's like, hey, man, he started noticing my athleticism. Yeah. As an offensive lineman, it's really about having good feet. Skateboarded a lot as a kid. I think that really helped me. But it was the first time he came to me. He's like, hey, man, you have a chance of really earning a scholarship if you really focus, work hard at this thing, and continue to improve. He's like, I see a lot of good things in you. And that was one of the first times I really got that validation. and that, receiving that validation for my performance on the field. And I was like, wow. And it really gave me this, that's when the dream was like kind of built and it started to blossom. And so I really focused that year and had a really good junior year, ended up making All-State in California. Started getting a lot of attention. My coach was really engaged, which I'm really grateful for, in the recruiting process. So he'd create, highlight tapes and send it out. And so I started getting a lot of scholarships my junior year, which, most guys, it's not until their senior year. So I had, a little bit of a profile. And then, I got offers probably from a bunch of bigger schools like Oregon, Arizona, Wisconsin offered me, all these bigger schools, but they didn't really recruit me super hard. So I was kind of like in between, where I wasn't like a top 5-star guy, but I was really good, but I was kind of undersized. And so a lot of people offered me, but they didn't really recruit me heavy because they're bigger schools. Like, if he comes, we'll great, but we're not like really forcing it.
Right.
And so UNLV was the only school that really recruited me heavy. There's a couple other schools, but I really fell in love with the coach at UNLV, the offensive line coach. And I fell in love with this idea as an underdog. I love the underdog story and being able to turn a program around. And UNLV at the time had like 10 years in a row where they won 2 games, and that's it. And they had a new coach and all this new energy, and they're like, you come be a part of this, and you can really shift this culture around and really make it a winning team. Didn't have one winning season my entire career at UNLV, which there's a lot of lessons in that. And we can talk about that a little bit, but yeah, I mean, the recruiting process was a lot of fun, and, going to UNLV was the decision that I made.
Did we get more than 2 wins in a season?
We went 2-10 my first year, 2-10 my second year. So we're just like, oh man, it's just like it's cursed, right? So it's like 12 years in a row where we won 2 games. Like, that's probably pretty hard to do. Like, not accidentally win one or accidentally lose another one. And it wasn't until my junior year, we actually had a chance to make to our first bowl game in like 15 years. And we finished 5-7. We lost our final game and went 5-7 instead of 6-6. And you have to have a winning record to go to a bowl game. Right. And the same thing happened my last year as well. We went 5-7, and it was just a real big disappointment.
That is frustrating, but that is exponentially better, right? 2 wins to 5 wins.
Yeah, we more than doubled our win total in those 2 years. So that was great.
Yeah. So I want to highlight something you said, and you may or may not have intentionally said it, but you said, I was a little bit undersized. And whenever that's the case for a position or a role, whatever it is, I always think of Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, if you've ever read that. And it's, those perceived disadvantages turn into your advantage, right? If you take advantage of it. And so thinking about that, my mind wanders to, well, if I'm undersized, I needed to either figure out how to be quicker, smarter, right? Right. There's something that I had to do to get the advantage and then actually have success. So maybe highlight a couple of those things that you had to do to say, all right, yes, I'm undersized, but here's where I can use this to my advantage.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that really separates us, every athlete is the work ethic, is how you show up and continue to improve. In my whole journey, I kind of fought with this internal dichotomy, right? There's this part of me that felt like I was the best on the field. Every time I stepped on the field, I was so confident, like nobody could beat me. But then there was this other side that was like kind of that felt like an imposter. Like, what am I doing here? I don't feel good enough. Like, maybe what if I get exposed? What if I fail? And I think every athlete can really resonate with that. And to really find success, you have to find balance within yourself with those two. Because if you lean too far one way, where I very much throughout my career, like there was one point in high school and I thought my shit didn't stink because I had figured out the game of football and I thought I was like the best. And my coach like basically kicked me out the field because my ego was getting too involved. Yeah. And it's funny to think back, like that was my 3rd or 4th year playing the game. And I thought I knew so much. And like, there's just always more to learn. And if you think, and it's a good lesson with life. If you show up in every situation, like there's nothing to learn, like you figured it all out, you're going to get passed by everybody else that has that beginner mind of trying to continue to improve, continue to learn, because everybody has something to learn, right? And even learn from somebody else, right? Even somebody that I try to approach every situation that the person I'm talking to has a very unique experience and they have a lesson that I can learn from. And I think that attitude is really important to navigating life and really continuing to learn and grow. And so for me, it was definitely the work ethic. And I definitely learned. I had really good football IQ, learned the game of football. And it was really challenging. Like getting into the pros was a lot more challenging with the playbook. And that challenged me in a lot of ways. And then, every single team I was on leading up to when I got drafted by the Falcons, I was the best player on the field,
Right.
a best player on the team. And to go from that to the pros where I'm surrounded by the best in the world, that imposter part of me that felt like I wasn't good enough definitely started creeping in a lot more. And that created this mindset shift, right? Like you have to have the mindset to overcome the limiting beliefs, the doubts, the fears. And I think that's one of the big things that football taught me is every single step along the way, I had to continue to push myself outside my comfort zone and know what I'm made of. And all of those lessons really, have helped me in this journey post football to really continue to show up and get outside my comfort zone. Just like you said, I love the quote, on the other side of fear lies freedom, and fear is the compass that we should be heading towards.
That is great. I think, a profound statement that you said is, there's constantly more to be learning, right? If you're at a plateau, that's a self-choice because there's always something more to be learning. So as you talk about, hey, I was the best on the field. I mean, as a freshman at UNLV, you play in 11 games, probably all your games. That's a
Yeah.
big deal.
Yeah. So, one of the reasons I wanted to go to UNLV is because I loved the game so much that I wanted to play right away.
Yeah.
I didn't want to sit on the sideline. I didn't want a red shirt. I didn't, going to Wisconsin, like it's a huge offensive line school. Like they put out so much talent. So I was like, I'll go there. I'll probably sit on the bench for 3 years before I even have an opportunity.
Yeah.
So I went to UNLV, which is a smaller school, because I knew that I would be able to play right away. And I first got there and I didn't, the coach, I was 17 when I first got there. I played my first game at 17. And I remember playing against BYU, who has a lot of, it's a Mormon kind of school. So a lot of people going on their missions and stuff. So there's like 24, 25-year-old grown men that I'm playing at 17 against, like just out of high school. But my coach, I didn't become a starter right away. And that was really hard on me. It was the first lesson of like having to sit and earn my stripes. But like about, I don't know, 4 or 5 games in the season, I started rotating in with the starters so they can get me on the field. And, yeah, man, it was a lot of fun and definitely wanted to play right away. It's the same thing when I went to the pros. Like I got drafted to replace this guy at center. He was a 13-year vet. And so my first year I was on the sidelines as a backup. And that was one of the biggest challenges for me because I felt like if I wasn't on the field playing the game, contributing to the team, I didn't really feel like I was a part of the team.
Yeah. Well, and it's probably a unique experience for you, right? I mean, like you said, hey, in high school, I was the best player. I mean, I played freshman ball, right? And then, I progressed on. And so I'm always playing. So yeah, you find, to your point, some self-worth and whatnot in what I'm actually contributing to the success of the team, not necessarily, hey, I've been in this spot before, I can still add value to the team at practice or, in my encouragement.
Yeah. And that's the thing about, the journey in football to make it to the pinnacle, to the league is like, and it's so funny, like all the people that I hear like, oh yeah, like I could have made it, but, they always have these excuses. And the cool thing at looking, being in a locker room in the NFL and looking around at every single person, knowing that every single person has a story of some adversity, some challenge that they overcame to get to that point. None of it was handed to them. And so there's this journey of constantly every single year, you have to like improve and step up and learn and grow. And so that journey is not just, hey, I decided to play in the NFL. There's so much that goes into it. And I'm so grateful for the journey because it's taught me so much about who I am and what I'm capable of.
Yes, I love it. Now, once again, similar question to before. Hey, when did you start getting recruited? As you're in college, when did you start getting the idea that, hey, the NFL is a possibility for me, and that's what I'm going to be doing?
Yeah, I was always a realist, I always had the dream that I wanted to play in the NFL. And obviously playing at a small school like UNLV, the odds of getting drafted were very slim. And I found it fascinating. I thought I played really well, but I got we didn't have a winning team. And as an offensive lineman, if you're not winning games, it's hard to get really recognized.
Right.
So I think the highest accolades I got at UNLV was like all conference honorable mention. So I wasn't even first or second team. And so that was like, it's kind of sucks not getting the media attention. Obviously you have to win games to get those kind of things as an offensive lineman.
Yep.
And, went into my senior year to dream to play in the NFL. I knew I was going to get an opportunity to go to a camp, and my dream obviously to get drafted was very much alive, but I was a realist. I was like, if I don't get drafted, maybe I was projected 7th round to a free agent. And so I was like, I'm just going to work hard. I remember talking to my strength coach and he's like, you're probably not going to get invited to the combine. Similar thing. We're at a small school, all this thing. And I remember when I first got that letter inviting me to the NFL combine, which only like 250, 270 people get an invite to go to, that was a huge moment. I was just like, oh my gosh, like my dream's very much alive. And that kind of really inspired me to show up. Like I'm getting that little bit of attention I need to get my foot in the door to really prove myself. Had a really good draft process, worked my ass off, really showed up at the combine and impressed a lot of people, and ended up moving up the draft board and got drafted in the fourth round to the Falcons.
Yeah. Now, obviously, you'd played in high energy, stressful, intense moments in your life, but the combine, I mean, especially to your point, like the position you're sitting in, like there's a lot that rides on the way you show up for those few days and what you're able to put on the, numbers report. So talk about just like the mental training of that. I mean, obviously, there's so much physical that goes into it, but just the mental part.
Yeah, I think the physical thing is what everybody's focused on. And even on TV, you see the last day when everybody's running their 40 and doing the drills. But what you don't know is like that's the last day of a 4-day, really intensive, emotionally draining, mentally draining combine where they like take you through these medical, right? So if you had any injury in college, they have the medical reports. You go see each individual team that's interested in you, you go see their doctor. I remember my shoulders, I have like really loose shoulders. So I'm like, they're like moving my shoulders in and out of socket, like multiple doctors, like 6 or 7
Oh my
different doctors.
gosh.
They're like messing with your knees. And so all this stuff, you're not getting a lot of really good sleep. You're kind of having to show up. You're doing these like Wonderlic tests, these intelligence IQ
Right.
tests. You have to show up for those. So you're just mentally drained trying to show up. And you have to like really show up in every single person you meet. You have to like bring your best self and like really try and impress people. So by the time you get to the actual day where you're running the stuff, that's like such a small part of it. But I
Right.
think it is a part of the evaluation process of like, how
Yeah.
can they show up and really perform when they've gone through this really mentally taxing thing. And, after going into the NFL and realizing like, that's a huge part of being in the league. It's
Yeah.
obviously have to be very physically in shape and stuff, but being able to handle the mental stress, the emotional stress, the performance anxiety, the always looking over your shoulder of like someone else can take my position at any time.
Right.
So like all of this stuff plays a role in the draft process, and the combine was definitely a very intense experience.
Yeah. Now, you alluded to this earlier, but you've also said multiple times, and that is, hey, I got drafted in the fourth round, which once again is huge. I mean, there's 7 rounds to get drafted is a big deal, let alone, to be in the essentially the top half. Um, but you still had doubts of like, yeah, that kind of imposter idea, but am I good enough? Am I the guy for this? So, is there anyone that you, kind of immediately got connected with? Because you talked about how cutthroat the league is, right? I mean, there's guys that are like, hey, this is my ability to generate a living for my family. But you probably need that veteran guy to show you some ropes a little bit there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I got drafted as a center in the fourth round of the Falcons, and when I got there, obviously I didn't. You're kind of ignorant to the fact of how the league works until you start experiencing it. But I realized when I got there, they drafted me to replace this center that's been there. I think he was a 12-year veteran at the time, and so I saw him as this like guy that's really solidified. Really, it's his job, and once he decides to retire, then it's going to be my opportunity. So I felt like I was kind of waiting in the wing. And one of the big lessons there I can kind of circle back to a little bit later on, but his name is Todd McClure, and I'm really grateful for him because as I came in, like he knew that they drafted me to replace him. And, although there's this really deep competition going on, he was never, he was never the kind of guy that was like, you're taking my job, like, screw you, I'm not going to help you
Yeah.
out. He very much paid it forward. And if I had any questions, I learned a lot from him, just witnessing him and like watching the way he shows up as a pro. And any
Mhm.
questions I had, he'd be very open to answering them. And I was just really impressed with, because he was an undersized center and he had this really long career, and he started, I think, 144 games in a row or something. Like he's really, really amazing dude. And so I learned a lot from him. And I took those lessons on to later in my career when younger guys were coming up. I was very much, I'm going to pay it forward. I'm not going to be here forever, and may the best man win. But
Yeah.
there is definitely some guys that like will kind of try and screw the younger guys because they know with millions of dollars on the line, it's a livelihood, right?
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say it's sometimes from an outside perspective, it's like, oh man, you should help train the young guy. But to your point, yeah, when there's a few $1 million on the line, some things can change a little bit. Easy to say when you have nothing riding on it.
Yeah, no doubt. It's a wild environment because obviously you're trying to create this culture and this team where we all are in it together, but at the same time we're not. We're all competing internally as well, and yeah,
Right.
it's a very fascinating environment to be in and compete in.
Yeah, to your point, I mean, it's sports and I've loved it. I didn't have nearly the success you did. I played college basketball, but yeah, I mean, it's that you're constantly competing against the other team, but every day you're competing against your teammates, right? Your friends. And it's like, dang, man, this is hard, but hey, we're gonna put the best product on the field and see what gives us the best chance to win.
That's right. That's right. It is definitely a business, and that business side of it really begins to wear on you as a player. It's funny, when I was in high school, it's always like, man, I'd play this game for free. I love it so much. And then I'm getting in the NFL. I'm like, man, I need more money. Like, this is just too hard.
That's funny. So things are going well in Atlanta. You're getting some playing time, not all at center, some at different positions, and then we have an injury.
Oh, well, there's a lot that goes into that. I had a very up and down career in Atlanta, and I can dive into it a little bit. So my rookie year, I get drafted, playing, as a backup. That's really challenging in its own right. End up my second year, the starting center who they brought back gets hurt for the first few games. And, the GM at that time is like, Joe, this is your job to lose now. Like, we're going to give you every opportunity, like, go out there and play well. And we're not giving it back to Todd. And I go out there and I play 3 games. And as soon as Todd's healthy, they just give him the job back, and I get benched again. And I'm like, man, it's so hard. And that was like my first experience of like, this communication is not necessarily truly transparent or truthful.
Right.
And so I felt that was like a first moment, kind of the rug was kind of ripped out from under me. I was like, all right, that was strange. And then a couple weeks later, our right guard got hurt. So I ended up playing the rest of the year at guard, which is a really cool experience, but I was out of position. I wasn't the best guard. Those guys are usually like a lot bigger, little like kind of maulers, moving guys around. Like center's a lot more cerebral and getting guys on the same page and a little more athletic. And that's where I thrived. Yeah. So I was out of position. We ended up playing, we go to the playoffs. We play the Giants. This is in 2011, the year the Giants won the Super Bowl. We played them in the first round. They like kicked our ass, and I didn't have a very good game. But the starting center, Todd, it was his 13th year at the time. His contract was up, and so he was set to retire after the year. And so I was like, okay, after this year, I'm going to be, moving over to center. It's going to be my job, and I'm going to have my own 13, 14-year career as a starting center of the Atlanta Falcons. And I was like, so excited about it. So leading up into the draft that year, basically watching the draft with a couple of my friends, a couple of the younger guys and teammates. And I'm like, not worried about, usually as a player, a lot of people, like, the fans are really excited about the draft, but as a player, the draft is a really scary thing, because if they draft somebody in the top couple picks at your position, it's very telling. And I was not worried at all. And so all of a sudden my buddy comes up to me and he's like, hey man, we're drafting a center with our first pick. And I was like, what? Yeah. And sure enough, a couple minutes later on the screen, we drafted the best center in the college football at that time. And that was one of the biggest just letdowns of my entire life. Like, the rug just felt like it was pulled out from under me, just felt so betrayed by the team, no open communication. And so going into training camp the year, I thought, originally it was going to be the starter. I went into training camp, barely made the team. I was just in this mindset of like victim mentality, really pointing the finger, like the strength coach is an asshole. Like, the head coach doesn't like me. The offensive line coach doesn't like me. They're not giving me an opportunity. They don't know how good I am. Right. All these excuses. And so I had a really hard year that year, didn't really dress. I was an inactive player. And through a couple of different experiences, I ended up getting suspended for 4 games for taking Adderall, got popped on a test. That was really hard. And it led to this point where I was actually in front of the head coach and the GM. And I never forget, it was Christmas Eve. We were like 12-2 at the time. We were about to be the number 1 seed in the playoffs. It was like really late in the season. And I just came off my suspension, and they had me, they're like, Joe, we're going to let you go. We're going to cut you. And that was the first moment in my entire life I was just filled with so much regret, because I knew that I was going to be on the streets without a job, my dream squandered. And although I was pointing the finger at everybody else because they didn't give me an opportunity, the finality of them finally being like, we're letting you go, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, it's my fault. I'm the one that didn't show up and work hard. And in that moment, I promised myself that, whatever experience comes after this, I'm not going to not give my all to make my dream a reality. There's going to be some point in the future when I'm not playing football anymore, but I don't want to have that feeling of I could have given more to make my dream come true. I'm going to do everything I can. And so through a couple different things, they ended up actually keeping me on the team, and ended up going in and finishing out the year. And then that starting center finally retired, and then went into the next year competing with the center that they had drafted. Yeah. And so it was an open competition between us two going into my 4th year, which is my contract year. And I had one of the best off seasons of my life, like totally shifted my mindset, my perspective. That moment was such a profound impact, not only in my career, but in my entire life of like, go take the opportunity. Don't wait for the opportunity. Right.
Right.
So I reshaped my entire body. I showed up, I worked harder than I ever have. I was balling out in that training camp, and I was outplaying this guy by a long shot. And even all my teammates are like, why aren't you with the ones? I'm like, it's a competition. Like by the time, the season starts, I'll be the starter. And so the week 1 comes around and they just don't say anything to me. There's like no communication. They just basically walk into the meeting room and he's the guy. And I was just like really just kind of upset about that as well. And so I was like, you know what? I've been through this before. I'm not going to make excuses. I'm just going to keep my head down and work hard. And this is my contract year. So I'll be out of here, wait for a fresh opportunity at a different team. And then about, I think week 9 or 10 that year, they end up benching him because he was playing so bad. And they're like, Joe, we're going to give you an opportunity to play. I ball out. I played like 7 really good games leading into my free agent year. And so right after that season, I loaded up my car, drove to Vegas to go train and get ready for free agency. And I was like so excited about the next opportunity. I wanted to go to a new team, fresh eyes, fresh start. And the Falcons were like, they offered me like a $50,000 signing bonus and like league minimum, which is like nothing in free agency. Like it was almost a slap in the face. Right. And I was like, I can get that any team I go to. I'm going to go wait for a fresh start. So I didn't talk to them the whole off season until free agency hit. And then they found out that the Colts really liked me. And so the Colts wanted me to get on a plane the first day of free agency, fly me up there. They're going to give me a contract. And the Falcons found out and they realized, oh, wow, we don't really want to lose Joe. So they ended up offering me a 2-year, $6 million deal and told me I'm the starter. And so I finally, my 5th year, earned the starting job, going back to Atlanta, super stoked, like finally earned this respect and made my dream a reality. Like I'm now I get to have my own 10-year career. I finally made it. I earned it. Yeah. And in the 4th game of that year, I ended up blowing my knee out and completely tore my MCL, ACL. And that was 11-month recovery.
Wow. So I want to hear a lot because I'm sure there was a lot that went into the recovery. But before we get to that, you made the comment, hey, they brought me in. They said, hey, we're probably going to be cutting you. And you had said at that moment, I finally stopped pointing fingers and I realized there were fingers to point, but it more needed to be on me. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen for everyone like a snap of the finger, right? A lot of people continue down that path for years. I mean, for the rest of their life, right? It was always someone else's fault. What do you think it is about you or maybe a life experience that really just allowed you to say, you know what, I'm going to take ownership of this?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've had a lot of lessons throughout my football journey that were minor, like a little bit like I had to show up. I had to work through some different things. I mean, I got benched a couple of times because I talked about my ego being like, I'm hot shit. I'm like the best, not acting like I have to show up and work hard. Yeah. And those lessons really taught me a lot because the coaches weren't scared to bench me. And I'm like, oh, wow, like I really better, show up and work. But this one was just so big because I'd never been told that I was going to get fired from football.
Yeah.
And, it was such a huge moment. And I don't know what it was about that experience. I think it was because I obviously had this real amazing work ethic and, you can't get to the league just on happen chance. Right.
Right.
And I think, so it was like this unconscious, like story that I was showing up with. And so the finality of that really woke me up to that. Right. And I think, when we talk about, these awakenings that people have, I think the first initial awakening that all of us need to go through is this realization that, going from the victim to the creator. And so I was definitely playing the victim in that story. And I realized like, nobody's going to give me this opportunity in life. Nobody has ever given me this opportunity. I've worked hard for it. And now it's going to be harder than ever. But do I want to show up and do that? Or do I want to just be like, oh, I'm not good enough? And I decided I'm going to do everything I can. And if I get cut again, I don't want it to be because I didn't try. And like, that has no story of anybody else but me. And I knew that I didn't give it my all and I couldn't live with that. And so, I went in and played another 5 years after that. And I'm really grateful for the way I showed up. And it was still very up and down. I lost my starting job a couple more times after that, ended up getting cut and going to Tampa. And, but I was okay with every single time this happened because the why it happened was out of my control because the things I could control, I showed up and gave it my all. But I knew in that moment, the things I could control, I wasn't controlling them the best of my ability. And I didn't want to live with that.
That's awesome. That's great perspective. So fast forwarding back, we have our injury. And once again, we're finally hitting our groove. We're finally feeling like, all right, I'm in the spot I deserve to be in. I've gained the recognition from the organization. Tear everything in the knee. That's grueling. That's tough to come back from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Talk,
Yeah, it was a hard moment because, like I said, I had finally earned, the starting job. The offensive line coach we had, Mike Tice, one of my favorite coaches I've ever played with, like he was like empowering me as a player. Like we had a really good relationship. So everything was just hitting on all cylinders. And I only got to play 4 games with him because then I blew my knee out. And then, just obviously the rehab of both blowing out the ACL and MCL, they're contradicting rehabs. Like the ACL, you're supposed to move as much as possible. The MCL, you're supposed to immobilize. So just working through that, it's an 11-month recovery is what I was told, the time frame. And that went up to basically the start of the season. So I started training camp. I was about 9 months into that recovery. So I wasn't even fully recovered. And, it was really challenging losing complete control of my leg, being like off my leg for up to like 5 or 6 months before I even started getting on the field, and then having to learn how to reuse it really challenged me mentally in a lot of ways, emotionally, feeling disconnected from the team. But after that year, the whole coaching staff got fired. And so I was realized I get an opportunity to fresh start, right? I have another year on my contract, and I'm going to be a free agent after that. So like, this is a really big year for me. They brought in Dan Quinn and Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan's offense is the wide zone scheme. So as a center, undersized guy who's really smart and athletic, I was a perfect fit. They came in, they saw the film of me playing. They're like, you're our guy, get your knee right, and you're going to be, the starting center for us for a long time. We just really believe in you. And so I went into training camp that following year, my what would have been my 6th year, as the starter. And by the end of training camp, because they thought my knee wasn't right, they didn't communicate this to me directly, but this is obviously what happened. I went from being the starter in the beginning of the preseason to playing in the final preseason game, the 4th preseason game, which if you guys know anything about football, most of the starters don't even play that game. It's just all the rookies and backups trying to find those or compete for those last couple roster spots. I went from being the starter at the start of preseason to playing in the 4th quarter of the 4th preseason game, which was almost an intentional slap in the face to me. And it was really hard. And so I went into that weekend before the season starts, when all the cuts happen. They go from 90 men on the roster to 53. Very big, very, very big weekend for a lot of guys on the bubble, right? It's very stressful. It's like, do I get that call? Am I going to get cut? Mm-hmm. And a lot of dreams are broken during that weekend. And I had been very familiar with that going into my 6th year. I realized, I might get cut. This is a very real possibility. So I make it through Friday, make it through Saturday, don't get cut. I get a call on Sunday from the team, and they say, we're going to go with this other guy as a starter. We just don't think your knee's right. So you'll be the backup. And I'm like, okay. So I go into work the next day on Monday, and I'm like, I've been through this before. I'm just going to work my ass off after my knee continues to improve, because it was improving pretty rapidly at that point. A couple weeks into this, I'm going to be the starter. It's going to be fine. Driving home from practice that day, I get a call from one of the scouts. He's like, hey, coach wants to see you. Bring your playbook. And everybody knows that means you're about to get cut. So I drive back up, and I'm trying to have this conversation with coach. I'm like, you're cutting me because of my knee. And they can't say that, because then they would have to owe me an injury settlement. And since I was working so hard to come back, and this is the conflict of interest in the NFL, is like, I'm working so hard to show that my injury is not hurting me. But when they realize it is hurting me, they can cut me without them having any responsibility to me, because they're like, oh no, your knee's good. Like you've already signed out and you've already cleared all the physical, but they cut me because of my knee. And because they cut me on that Monday, all of the rosters across the league were already set. So there was no opportunities for me to go to a new team and be the guy. So I ended up getting a call from my old coach, Dirk Cutter, who is now down in Tampa Bay. And he's like, hey man, we don't have a starting opportunity, because they had just signed a center that to a free agent deal that was, getting paid pretty good money. But he's like, we would love to have you, because we need somebody that can play both center and guard and be a swing guy in the middle and back up. And I'm like, all right, I'm down. Let's do it. So I ended up going down there and basically got a minimum contract with all of these incentive bonuses, playtime incentives. So I would have had to play like 90% plus of the games to hit all of these incentive bonuses, which is going to be really hard to do because they had the starting center.
Right.
So I got down there week 2 of my 6th year. First play of the second half, the starting center rolls his ankle. And so I go out there, I end up starting the next 30 games in a row and never give the job up because I played so well, hit all of my playtime incentives, which gave me an opportunity to build the financial freedom that I had to end up walking away when I did, which it all really worked out in a beautiful way. And I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity to go to a new team, because going from Atlanta to Tampa, they had a lot younger team. And so I was there as my 6th year. So I just stepped in immediately as a leader. Everybody looked up to me, and it was really, really cool to have that experience.
Absolutely. So in that final year in Tampa, and once again, there's probably a lot of stories that go into this specific moment, but you've kind of talked about, some of the mistrust and the, having rug pulled out, and, that starts to weigh on guy. And in that, final year in Tampa, you talk about, hey, I lost the starting job for the 5th time in 8 years. Some things in my personal life just aren't, the way I thought they were going to be going either. And in your head, you start getting that idea, this might be time for me to walk away from the game.
Yeah, it's there's a lot that goes into that decision. I think if you ask any player in the NFL, or most guys in the middle of the season, if they're thinking about retirement, they'd probably say yes, because NFL football season is very long. It's like 17 weeks plus 6 weeks of training camp, and it's the most physically, mentally, emotionally demanding thing on your life. And so you're just, by the end of the season, you're just so worn out, and then you luckily have 2 or 3 months off completely, and you refresh and the body heals, and you're like, okay, I'm ready to go back and do it again. So that was a slow story that was kind of cultivating within me, especially after my knee injury. I was like, at first I questioned if I could even play again on it, because it was just such a traumatic event. And so it was really this idea of, like, I had enough money to know that I was financially secure.
Yep.
And I was confronted with this question of, do I keep playing this game that's taking so much from me physically? Do I want to be able to play with my kids when I'm older? That was a lot. The CTE stuff was coming out around that same time, the brain trauma, which is a very frightening thing. We can talk more about that, but it all this kind of cultivates, like, do I keep playing this game for a couple more $1 million? And what would that really add to my life? Or is my health more important? And, I decided that my health was more important. And, there was a part of me that was really excited about being done because of all the challenges that I had during football. But there's definitely still a part of me that, my identity was really lost in the game. And that inner dichotomy was very much alive, and, ended up walking away from the game after my 8th year. And that's when the real journey began.
Yeah, absolutely. So you hit on it, there's so much of you that's been wrapped up in football, right? I mean, that's what you're known for. That's what you're getting paid for. When people, ask what you do, which is the most common question, right? It's like, oh, well, Joe plays football. I'm sure all of your friends are quick on the trigger to say that, right?
Yep.
And so there's a lot of self-worth wrapped up in that. And I'm sure when you first walk away, it maybe doesn't even quite kick in yet, but maybe like when the next season rolls around, or when like Sundays happen and you're like, oh crap, like that's not me anymore. Or that's not what defines me anymore, is probably a better way to say it. How did that come through? And, talk a little bit about that for you.
Yeah, there's a lot of really unique challenges that being a former pro athlete is faced with, and it's why what I'm working on now is so important to me. And it's really hard to prepare for. They have a lot of people come to talk to us about, you're not, the NFL stands for not for long. You're not going to play this forever. Have a plan B, have a backup plan, know what you're going to do when you're done playing. All of these things I was very aware of. And I remember even telling myself while I was playing, like, football is something I do. It's not who I am. And when, you talked about when people ask me, like, what do you do? I had a lot of resistance to saying I played football, because it would just change their perspective of who I was, and it would create a story that they already knew who I was. And I really had a lot of resistance to, like, being a football player. And I wanted to be known to the world as something more than just a football player. Yes. That all being said, when I was finally done playing, like a few weeks after my final game, and there was a part of me that was really excited about being done playing. So for me to, like, all of a sudden be hit with the finality of, like, whoa, like, football was definitely a big part of who I was. And I wasn't giving that enough credit. Of course, I played 16 years. I had the singular vision and focus to reach the best and be the best player on the field I could possibly be. That's all I ever thought about. That's all I ever wanted. Yeah. So for me to, like, think it was going to be an easy thing to go transition and go figure out who I was, I was definitely surprised about how hard it was, even though I was one of the lucky few that got to walk away on my own terms. Yeah. And, that led me to this identity crisis, which a lot of guys go through. And you start being faced with these existential questions of who am I in relation to the world without this thing that had defined me for so long. And for me, I went through a big breakup at the same time. I was engaged to a woman that, it was this kind of, unhealthy cycle, ended up transitioning out of that. But I deeply loved her. That was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. So and that was 4 weeks before my final game when I finally transitioned out of that. So it was just this old identity in more ways than just football. Like everything I thought I had projected out into the future of who I was, what I wanted, I just didn't know anymore. And so that led me on this journey of self-discovery, of self-realization. And in order to do that, I knew I had to keep moving. I had to go experience life. I wanted to experience the freedom from this game that I had felt like a prisoner of almost. Yeah. And so that led me to the decision to give away all my stuff to charity. I bought a van, rescued a dog, and hit the road. What was supposed to be a couple months road trip to visit some friends and family that lived all over the country and just experience the freedom. That turned into more of a lifestyle. And almost 2 years after my final game was when I finally kind of grounded out. Still very much a part of, lifestyle. I have a wanderlust spirit where I love traveling. But on that journey, I'm really grateful that I had the courage to go after that experience. I think a lot of people in big transitions like this, and we're going through a big transition collectively in the world, right? There's a lot of fear of the unknown, not knowing what to expect. And I think as humans, we really love creating comfort for ourselves, routine, knowing what to expect the following day. But when we get lost in that, it kind of pushes fast forward on our life, right? And we end up, in our 60s, the hitting retirement, the thing we thought we were working for our entire lives, and all of a sudden we're unsatisfied, we're unhappy, we have nothing that we feel fulfilled with. And I'm really grateful that I got to experience that at the age of 29, and that allowed me to go on this journey at a younger age and do this deeper self-discovery. And it's changed my life in every aspect.
Yeah. So I love how you say that. I'm trying to find myself. So what else would a guy do? I'll just give all my stuff away, buy a van, and I'll just drive around 30,000 miles and, just figure out life. Right. Yeah. So as you were doing that, once again, I'm sure there were some people in your life that said, yeah, take a week, take 2 weeks. That sounds really good for like 2 weeks, but then come back. Right. And you're like, no, I'm just going to go, I'll be back when I'm back. I'm not sure when that's going to be. So I'm sure that's, met with a little bit of, what's Joe doing?
Yeah. That's the thing is there's a lot of deeper stories I can kind of talk about, but I didn't feel like I had anywhere to go back to.
Yeah.
Even if I left, like, where was I going to come back to? I didn't know where to go. I didn't feel grounded anywhere. Like, I was in Tampa. I was there to play football. I had a couple of friends that were pretty much on the team. I knew if I stayed there and then the next season started, all my teammates go back to practice, I would have felt even worse. And I think a lot of guys deal with that. So I was like, I just need to get moving. I grew up in Southern California, like we talked about. My parents had moved to Texas probably like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years before that. So like and a couple of friends still in Southern California, not super connected with them. So there's really nothing to take me back there. I played in Atlanta for a little while, so I had some really good friends there and some grounded roots there, but I just didn't feel like connected to that city. So I didn't really know where to go. So I was like, I know people in New York, I know people in Chicago, I know people in California, in Nevada, in Texas, my family. So I was like, let me get this van and just go explore this freedom, go visit people all over the country so I can just figure out who I was. So I was kind of just floating in the wind, not really knowing what to do, not feeling grounded. I didn't know where my home was. I felt very estranged from my parents at the time. And that's a deep part of my story. I think a unique challenge that you don't really realize until you're done playing is that not only was my identity wrapped up in football, but all of my friends, all of my family and my parents, I was a football player to them. And for me, I became more of a football player than their son. And that was really hard on me. And so for me to not know who I was in relation to the world, how could I expect anybody else to know who I was? And so the only really person I felt like I could connect with was my older sister, and she was very supportive through that entire journey. And everybody else looked at me like I was crazy. Like, what are you doing? You're going to go live out of a van. And it's a very alternative lifestyle, right? Yeah. And it was isolating. And it was really cool because when I went out and I started, sharing the journey on Instagram, then USA Today and ESPN wrote an article about me. And I started getting flooded with people following my journey and how me just making this decision and going out into the world, into the unknown, it really inspired others in a pretty profound way. And that really inspired me to know, like, oh, I'm not alone in the way I feel. Although there's this pinnacle experience and not a lot of people experience, leaving pro football,
Yeah.
it's a very relatable experience of feeling trapped, of feeling like this self-created prison, not knowing what to do, where to go, feeling trapped in a relationship, in a job, in a city. And I was just, it takes courage to
Yeah.
really go out and explore the unknown. And not a lot of people have that courage. And by me doing it, I was inspiring others to develop that courage within them to go make a change. And that's really inspired me to continue to show up in the work that I'm doing now, is really helping inspire others to become the creators of the reality, not only externally, but internally as well. And that's
Yeah.
really where it all begins.
I love it. That's so true. And on this journey, you had said obviously there's a lot of highlights in the 38,000-mile trip, but you said the Grand Tetons was one of the most impactful stops for you, or kind of moments. Talk a little bit about what your takeaway was, in your time there, and what made that so impactful for you.
Just the beauty of the nature is one of the things, right? Just, we being in this country and traveling around this country, it's so diverse and beautiful in so many ways. There's the mountains of the Grand Tetons, there's the deserts, there's the Grand Canyon, there's the different beaches. Like, there's just so much beauty in this country. And I'm really grateful that I decided that I wanted to go see it with my own two eyes and not just through the screen in my hand.
Yeah.
And so there's, that level. And I think the biggest lesson, especially with that Grand Tetons experience, is being open to the adventure that the road had for me, not planning too much, right? I didn't even know Grand Tetons existed, but I was in San Francisco, and through a couple different synchronicities, like, people are like, hey, go stay with my cousin in Nevada City. So I go stay with a guy I never met in Nevada City, literally stayed at his house for a weekend. I'm like, where should I go next? They're like, well, have you been to Jackson Hole, Wyoming? I go to Jackson Hole. I was like, have you been to the Grand Tetons? So I find a campsite in Grand Tetons, and I just end up, on this cliff face camping, overlooking this body of water with the Grand Teton mountain range, sun setting behind it, and just me looking out and being like, wow, like, I'm so grateful, because I would have never known this existed if I wasn't just open to the universe bringing me right to this moment. And there was multiple experiences like that. And it really taught me a lot about trust and faith that, like you said, the kind of intention of this show is to, when you're in something, it might be very challenging, might not know why it's happening to you. You might be in this downward spiral. But for me, every single time I've been in a situation that's been really challenging, it's always worked out in the most beautiful way. And it's taught me about who I am, what I'm capable of. And it's led me towards a more beautiful journey, more beautiful experience. And now I really try to recreate that experience of going into the unknown as much as possible, because that's where real growth happens, is getting outside your comfort zone. And that's where the real magic happens, right? Like, if you have a routine and you know what to expect tomorrow, how are you ever going to really be in the awe and experience the synchronicities and the joy and just the adventure that this life really was created for?
I love that. So you may not have a written out way to define this, but who is Joe today? How would Joe define himself today after having had time to just be, right?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, the big journey all of us are on,
Yeah.
right? Is, who am I? And realizing for me, on this deep work I've done, I am not my story. I am not the story of who I think I am. And I am the thing that's deeper, that has the ability to create the story that I want to be.
Mm.
And so I'm going, like I said, that first example of going from being a victim to a creator of reality. And since that moment till now, I question everything. If there's a story, a limiting belief that comes up within me of like why I can't, or there's a fear, like, really having an awareness of that, being able to move through that and realize that's just a story. I can break through these walls because I've done it before. And so now I'm on this path of really trying to have an impact and help guide others on their journey to that self-realization, and realizing that we are all so much more alike than we are different. We are all these beautiful creators of this reality. And to be in the experience of that doesn't mean it makes it any easier, right? There's still challenges, there's still fears, but having the awareness to move through it as real growth happens. And I feel like I'm really just getting started, and I'm excited to see where the adventure takes me.
Yes, you are just getting started, and you're getting started with Hart Collective. So talk a little bit about the mission there and what you're doing, because once again, to your point, you're not alone. We're not alone in this journey of some of these things we were trying to figure out.
Yeah, totally. So that whole experience of walking away from the game and how challenging it was and being on the road and just learning so much about myself, I, joined a couple different communities of like-minded people trying to really grow and reach their fullest potential. And on that journey, realizing, wow, if I had a community of former pro athletes to plug into when I was done playing, it would have had a huge difference on that transition. And doing my own search, there was really nothing out there. And, I've always had this vision of being an entrepreneur and wanting to create a business. And so it was like, any good entrepreneur sees a hole in the market and a need within their own life, and they go out and create it. And so that's the journey I'm on now. Started the Hart Collective. The idea came to me a couple of years ago. And, the beautiful thing about that is I had a lot of fear and resistance at first for a lot of different reasons, but ended up working through that, ended up launching it last November. And then, like I just talked about, literally this last weekend, I hosted my first men's retreat where I had 6 former athletes. And so it's really starting to cultivate, really starting to manifest into this physical reality from an idea into the physical. It's really beautiful to not only talk about being the creator of my own reality, like I was saying, but actually creating something out of nothing, this idea, this vision, and allowing it to come through me and trust and, just continue to work for that vision and really helping impact guys on a deeper level. I'm just so grateful and really excited about where this journey is going to take me and the impact that it's going to have.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, I appreciate the heck out of your time today, man. Once again, your story is fascinating, and you've been an absolute rock star in just being open, transparent, vulnerable in regards to, the outside perspective of pro athletes, right, is one thing. And then the things that a person goes through are completely different, but your ability to work and navigate through that. And then today to see on the journey, by the way, the flexibility and the weight loss, man. I mean, G's and P's, you can write a health nutrition book for guys as they retire as well. That could be a part of Hart Collective.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
All right, there we go.
Yoga, get into yoga. Yoga will change your life, no doubt.
Yeah, when you I saw some photo you posted and I was like, that doesn't look like a guy that played, that many years in the NFL and had knee problems. That looks like, a limber person.
Yeah, a lot of hard work, a lot of showing up each day on the mat, really working through the pain and the resistance, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally and spiritually. And yeah, I think that's why all of these things, you don't ever fully arrive, right? I'm really grateful that my body's in such physical pain because it forces me to go on the mat. Because if I don't, then my body's going to hurt. And so that's created this need for consistency in that way, which has helped open me up, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually as well. And I'm really grateful for that.
I love it. Well, Joe, thanks again for the time today, brother.
Phil, thanks, brother. Have a good one, man.